Welcome everybody. This is our first Sappy hour of 2024, and the first one in our series on using Atlas data. So we're very excited to be kicking this off with a overview of year three. Before we start that, I just want to give a quick land acknowledgement. So I know we have about everybody joining from all across Ontario today, which is on the traditional territories of many different First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. I'm in Guelph. My name is Claire, by the way. I should start. I'm the moderator for this session. So I'm living in Guelph, which is on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Attawandarunk peoples. It is also part of the Between the Lakes Treaty, or Treaty 3, which the treaty holders of that are the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. But today, Guelph is home to a wide array of different First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples from all over Turtle Island. So what I encourage you to do as Atlasers is to take a minute to think about where you live and whose land that you live on and whose land that you Atlas on as well. And I believe we'll post a link in the chat it's a really neat mapping feature you can use to see all the different traditional territories throughout Turtle Island. So yeah, with that, we'll move on to our Sappy Hour. So again, welcome. My name is Claire. I am going to be moderating this session. So if you're new to Sappy Hours, Sappy Hour is a little bit of a wordplay on happy hour. And it also ties into our mascot, Sammy the Sapsucker. And it's just an opportunity to relax, learn a little bit more about the Atlas, and just have a presentation about different topics relating to the Atlas. It's also a good opportunity for you guys to ask questions. If you have any questions about Atlasing or about the project, different, it's open really. So yeah, it's just a bit of informal chat, chance to kick back and learn a little bit more about the Atlas. So today we're going to give an overview of this Sappy Hour is celebrating and summarizing year three. So with the start of year four, we want to take a minute to just acknowledge everybody who worked so hard to get some Atlas data up year three and just highlight that. Today we'll have Mike Burrell and Kaylin Bumelis, who's going to be giving the presentation. So Mike is the Atlas coordinator, and Kaylin is the Atlas project manager. If you've been involved in the Atlas at all, you've probably heard from both of them. I know you've been probably getting emails from Kaylin about Atlas updates, and these two really keep the project running. And yeah, it's a power team right here. So they're going to be covering all the highlights from year three. And everything that we've accomplished so far. As we go along, feel free to post questions in the Q&A function. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A button. If you click that, it'll open another window and you can ask put your questions there. If you have any general comments, not really questions, but anything else you want to say, there's also the webinar chat, which you can access in the call as well. So if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can also ask your questions on Facebook Live as well, underneath our stream in the comments. So you can pose those questions anytime, and then we will return to those questions at the end of the webinar. Once the presentation is over, we'll have a Q&A session. This recording is also, or this webinar is also being recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube channel in the next few days. And with that, I think we'll hand it over. So yeah, we'll hand it over to Kaylin and Mike. Take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Claire. I really appreciate it. For those who don't know, Claire was our field biologist this past season, was a team lead in Algonquin. and is now helping us plan for this upcoming season. So we're excited to have her here as well. And we're really excited to have everyone else here too. The Atlas, of course, would not be possible without all of the volunteers that we have working on it. Ontario is quite large and definitely not possible for me, Mike, and Claire to survey the entire province ourselves. So we really appreciate all of our volunteers, and that's why we do this presentation, is to celebrate all of you. So next slide, Mike. For those of you who might be new to atlasing or to the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, this is just a quick overview. Mike and I realized that, whereas we look at this every single day, you folks might not. So just a refresher that the province is broken up into 47 different regions, and then each region is broken up into 10 by 10 kilometer squares. So in each one of these squares, we want 20 hours and 25 point counts to be completed. And so that target kind of changes depending on where you are in the province. So the map on the right shows our target effort, our target effort. So in Southern Ontario, that darkest green, we want every single square to have 20 hours during the peak season, which is May 24th to July 10th. And we want 25 point counts. So in 100% of the squares. In the lighter green, what we call the roaded north, we want 5% of squares to have 20 hours and 25 point counts. And then in the roadless north, which is that lightest green at the very top, we want 2% of squares to have the hours and the point counts. On top of this, we do encourage folks to do these optional surveys. These are surveys that try to account for species that maybe are harder to get on general atlasing or on point counts. So owl surveys, nightjar surveys, and marsh bird surveys. So we do encourage atlasers to do those, but they are not required in every single square. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So what we wanted to do first was compare where we are now with where we were at this time in Atlas 2. So after the first 3 years in Atlas 2, how do we kind of compare to that? So in terms of atlasers, we have a similar number of atlasers who have been participating in the Atlas. In terms of species, the same sort of thing. We're looking pretty well on track with Atlas 2. Where we're falling behind a little bit is the number of squares that have been surveyed in this Atlas during the first 3 years compared to Atlas 2. Obviously in Atlas 2, during the first 3 years, there were a few more squares that were surveyed, but I don't think that the gap is insurmountable in the coming years. In terms of number of records, you can see that our 1.5 million records compared to 300,000 records during Atlas 2, we have a lot more records this Atlas. And that can be attributed to the fact that we're doing a checklist-based approach this time. So every time you go out atlasing, you're recording every single bird species that you see in here. So you'll record a robin several times over, whereas during the last Atlas, you would just record it the one time with the highest breeding evidence. So we do have a lot more records, and that's a lot of powerful data that people will be able to use for conservation now and, of course, when the Atlas is over. The number of point counts, we have a bit more point counts than we did during Atlas 2. During Atlas 2, that was the first Atlas where we had done point counts. So they did have a bit slower of uptake. So I think we had a bit of a head start, which is great. And I think we're continuing on strong. And then number of hours, we also have more hours than during Atlas 2. So we have just about 95,000 hours so far. The brackets is the hours during the peak period. So during the last Atlas, they didn't count peak period versus not peak period. So that's why we have the 94,000 and then 56,000 in brackets. So this is just an opportunity for us to encourage folks to kind of go outside of their squares if their squares do have the adequate coverage. So if your square is at the 20 hours and 25 point counts, and you can survey a neighboring square or help get some other squares up to their adequate survey coverage, then now's the time to do it. We've got two seasons left to try to get more squares complete. So next slide. Excellent. So this is showing the input methods. There are 3 ways that you can input your data into the Atlas. So the first one is the Nature Counts app, that's shown in yellow. The second is the Nature Counts web portal, which is in blue. And then the third is eBird import, so where you input your checklist into eBird and then you import it into Nature Counts. So over the years, the Nature Counts app has become more and more popular, and that's for a really good reason. In 2021, they released the version of the Nature Counts app for the Atlas, and since then have been working tirelessly on improving it. We've had many, many meetings, and they've indulged all of our wishes in terms of features that we were looking for. For point counts, they have a point count timer on the app now. For checklists, they have a little warning that lets you know when you're exiting the square or when you're nearing the square boundaries. There's a lot of really great Atlas-specific features that the Nature Counts app has been implementing. So if you're not using the app yet, I would really encourage you to give it a try. If you tried it in 2021 when we were still in the beta version, then I would ask you to give it another go. Lots of people have been given rave reviews on the Nature Counts app, and I mean, the proof is in these pie charts. 63% of people, 2/3 of Atlasers, are now using the Nature Counts app. If you're not into apps or you don't have a phone, you can still import things or you can still input your data through the Nature Counts web. That's totally okay too. Next slide. Special surveys. I touched on this a little bit earlier, talking about how we try to do some surveys that target species that might not be might not be found on point counts or general atlasing checklists. So we have a few different owl surveys: eastern screech owl, northern, central, and northern hawk owl surveys. So you can see that over the past 3 years, all of the surveys have become more and more popular. I think people are getting the hang of things. People are getting some of their point counts done and are, turning to some of these special surveys. It's really great to see. As you can see, the Eastern Screech Owl surveys have really taken off. That's not entirely surprising because those are done in Southern Ontario where there's lots more folks. But the marsh bird surveys have really taken off too, which is another great thing to see. So yeah, keep up with the special surveys. The owl surveys are coming up soon in March. So keep an eye out, and yeah, looking forward to doing those. Next slide. All right, now we get into the meat of things. How are we doing in terms of effort? So we're starting off in Southern Ontario. I've kind of highlighted or circled on the right which part of the province this is kind of taking place. We want 100% of squares to have 20 or more hours in this part of the province. So we want them all to be red, and we're getting there. You can see that a lot of the squares are, turning red or even orange. We're making a lot of progress, and we still have 2 seasons left, so I'm feeling pretty confident about it. I know that sometimes looking at it at the square level can be hard to comprehend because, there's the region boundaries, and then you have all of those little squares with different colors. So what we've done is we've kind of amalgamated all the squares to the region level. Thanks, Mike. He's reading my mind. So we've amalgamated all the squares to the region level to show, okay, what percentage of the squares have 12 or more peak hours. And the reason we picked 12 hours was because if someone was the principal atlaser in a square and they were going to do an equal number of hours each year, then you'd do 4 hours a year for 5 years. So after the 3rd year, you should have 12 hours. Obviously, that's not how everyone does it, and that's okay too, but this is just a way for us to visualize things. You can see that most of Southern Ontario is actually doing pretty good. Region 47 and 7, that's Wellington and Waterloo. They've got 75 to 100%. And then you can see Toronto and spanning upwards into cottage country is also in that 75 to 100% range. And then Ottawa over on the right-hand side as well. The rest of the regions in that very Southern Ontario region are doing pretty good. And then there's some on the periphery that have fewer squares with the 12 or more peak hours, especially as you get into kind of close to the border of what we call Central Ontario. So some of those regions have fewer squares with 12 or more peak hours, but we're working towards, getting those up there. Next slide. So this is showing the Northern Ontario regions and blocks. So in these areas, in the roaded north and in the roadless north, we want 5% of squares and 2% of squares to have the 20 hours and 25 point counts. So how do you calculate what 5% or 2% of the squares are? Well, we divide them up into even bigger blocks, what we call them. So each block has 100 squares in it, and we want 5 or 2 squares in each block to have the 20 hours and 25 point counts. So given that, we're showing the blocks here, the 100 by 100 kilometer blocks. And so we either want them to be that medium orange, the 3 to 5% of squares, or the lighter orange with the 1 to 2% of squares. So I'd say in the roaded north, we're doing really great. Our RCs have been, our regional coordinators, sorry, don't need to use the acronym there. Our regional coordinators are doing a really great job of getting those regions complete with their 5% of squares, with the appropriate amount of hours. And then in the roadless north, we have been doing northern trips. In 2021, of course, due to COVID, we were not able to do any of our trips, but 2022 and 23, we were able to do some of those to get some coverage in the north. Next slide. So we're kind of starting the roll again, but this time we're looking at point counts instead of the peak hours. So this is showing the number of point counts in each square and each region. And of course, we want 100% of the squares to have 25 or more point counts. So every single square here should have at least 15 point counts if you're, again, kind of parsing them out equally between years. So if we go to the next slide, we can see what percentage of the squares in each region has 15 or more point counts. Again, you could see some of the regions from the peak hours slide also are doing really great in point counts. The Wellington and Waterloo in and around the Toronto area. But regions 4 and 6, so Huron and that's Middlesex Elgin, are doing really great with their point counts as well. Again, as you get further north, fewer point counts, there's fewer people. And so we're working with the regional coordinators to get staff in there. If there's anyone local, if anyone wants to go up there for a trip and do some point counting or get some peak hours in there, that would really help too. Next slide, please. All right, and again, the blocks in the north. So this is showing some of the point counts that have been done in the roaded north and in the roadless north. So again, the regional coordinators doing a really great job in getting those point counts in. In the roadless north, some of these are from our northern trips and some of them are from autonomous recording units that Mike will talk about later. So I won't spoil that for him, but we'll go to the next slide. All right, Zoom point counts. So this is something that's brand new, this atlas. So I was talking about how doing point counts in general was new during Atlas-2, so in 2001 to 2005. And now we're doing Zoom point counts. So that's with this little device here, where if there's someone that's not confident with their bird ID or someone who is potentially losing their hearing and not comfortable doing point counts any longer, they can take out this digital recording unit and they can record the point count. So you go out, you give the metadata, where, when, who's doing the recording, you record it for 5 minutes, and then you send it in to be interpreted. So, of course, with all new technology, there's a little bit of a slower uptake. We were really excited to get 900 digital point counts in 2021, and it's only grown from there. In 2022, we got 1,600 digital point counts, and then in 2023, we've had around 2,600 digital point counts that were completed. So the map on the right is showing where those digital point counts were done. You can see some of them going up to the Hudson Bay lowlands, and those are our northern trips, of course. And then the rest are kind of scattered throughout the roaded north and even into Southern Ontario, which is great. Next slide.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a break there, Kaylin. I'm gonna take over for a little bit here, and then Kaylin's gonna pop back on. So she alluded to these autonomous recording units, ARUs, and these have been a huge new tool for us to use in Atlas-3, along with those Zoom units that Kaylin was talking about on the previous slide. So these are recording devices that can be pre-programmed and put into place for an extended period of time. And a significant number of them, about 200 per year, have been deployed in the extreme north of Ontario by Canadian Wildlife Service Ontario region with support from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So this is a map of where these devices have been deployed, and it's extremely exciting for us to see this map and see how these are being used in Atlas-3. So as I said, about 200 per year. The purple shows where they were deployed in 2021. Red is 2022 2022, and orange is last year in 2023, and we're expecting some more over the next 2 years. So these are really filling in knowledge gaps in that roadless north, where we can't drive to, obviously, by vehicle. And a lot of these are put in places far away from rivers, which was previously our only real coverage in the roadless north in Atlas-2. So these are filling in gaps away from those rivers especially, and they're really changing our knowledge about what's happening in this part of the province with our birds. So it's super exciting. We've got 2 years worth now of the data that has been analyzed, interpreted. So the recordings are taken. Most of these are deployed by helicopter, so they have to be picked up by helicopter in the fall. So we've got our 2023 units that have been collected, and we're starting to go through what's been heard, but they're not into the Atlas yet. But those first 2 years, 2021, 2022, we've got that data now, and it's filling in our species map. So I wanted to quick share a couple species that we've really seen a lot of detections from with these ARUs. So these two maps look very similar. And if I switch back to the previous map, you'll see they match up really, really closely with the red and the purple. So these are Connecticut warbler on the left and great gray owl on the right. So a huge percentage of these ARUs are detecting both of these species from our 2021 and 2022 deployments of ARUs. And you can see the vast majority for both species of our records in Atlas-3 are coming from these ARUs. So it's super exciting for us to see this roadless north filled in with additional data that we didn't have access to in Atlas-2. So very, very pumped to see this stuff coming in, and even more is going to come soon. We had lots of great data collected about significant species as well. So Kaylin talked about the sheer number of records, 1.5 million records coming into the Atlas. Huge information source for years to come to help our conservation planning. But a big percentage, almost 10% of those records are species that we have listed as either provincially rare or species of interest. So a huge chunk of the entire database, about a third of those came from this past year, 2023. We've been talking a lot. If you've been on any of these Sappy hours in previous years, you'll know we talk a lot about pinning locations. So that's one of the nice features of the Nature Counts app. If you find an unusual species or just something you want to make extra note of, you can drop a pin at the exact location of that species. So we've got up to 30,000 pins now of specific exact locations for species, and about 10,000 of those came from just this past year alone. And then species at risk are a big focus for us as well. We've recorded 41 species at risk. So these are endangered, threatened, or special concern species. 41 species, and it's about 63,000 records of those species at risk. And about a third of those records came from this past year alone, and we recorded 39 species. There's tons of highlights, way too many. I started making a list of rare species that were big highlights from 2023, and I realized I couldn't mention them all, but I've got 3 photos here of breeding records from this past year. So on the left there is a lark sparrow. That's down in the Essex area. We had a pair of lark sparrows in Essex County, which was pretty exciting stuff. And then in the middle photo there, that's a family group of black-necked stilts. And I talked about them last year at this exact Sappy hour. I talked about black-necked stilts last year too, because it was the first year we had ever had successful nesting of black-necked stilts down in the Strathroy sewage lagoons. Well, they upped themselves, and we had 2 successful nesting sites for black-necked stilts in 2023, which is absolutely bonkers. And then I've got a photo there on the right. That is a Henslow sparrow, one of the rarest breeding species in Ontario. And I think we had about 3 locations with Henslow sparrows with breeding evidence in 2023. So extremely exciting stuff from the significant species side of things. In terms of the more commonly reported species, these are your top 10 superstars of breeding birds in Ontario. American robin has moved up to the top of the list. And we've had some new species move onto the top 10 that were not there in previous years. So white-throated sparrow was not in the top 10 last year and has moved up to number 3 this year, which is it's pretty cool to see that big of a change just from year to year. But all of those species that are in the top 10 are now reported at more than 2,000 individual squares, which is pretty amazing stuff. In terms of our human superstars, special shout out to Tyler Hoare and Don Sutherland, who have both submitted more than 40,000 individual records, which is pretty amazing stuff. Huge number of checklists have come in from some of our superstar atlasers, and tons of different squares. That number from Tyler Hoare, the number of squares he's visited is absolutely incredible, almost 1,000 individual squares. So huge shout out to our superstars, but for everybody who submitted any data, it's all making such a great difference towards reaching our goals. So everybody can give yourselves a big round of applause, big pat on the back. It's great stuff to see. In terms of individual point counts completed, in-person point counts, Bob Saunders is number 1 by a long shot again this year. So huge congrats to Bob and everybody else who's completed any of the point counts. They're super important for the data analyses that are going to come over the next couple of years and are making a big difference again towards reaching our Atlas goals. There's so many highlights for us to talk about from this past field season. I'm sure Kaylin would agree. It was really nice to start doing some more in-person activities that we didn't get to do so much in the first 2 years. So some of the highlights that are up here, we've got our staff up at Killbear Provincial Park. We had a great set of 10 staff that were out across the province collecting data, and we did our training workshop at Killbear Provincial Park, which was tons of fun. We had an in-person kickoff that we got to host at Hamilton, but there was local kickoff events, year 3 kickoff events held by RCs around the province that were tons of fun. There's a few of the different photos there. Some square bash fun. We had some great square bashes. French River, that's the photo in the bottom right. That rainy, they got a bit more rain than they would have liked. We had a great square bash at McGregor Park as well as at Charlotte Lake as well. So lots of fun. Big Atlas weekend, another big highlight, which I'm looking forward to already for this year. So lots of fun highlights. Did I lose my slide here? There we go. Yeah, lots of great highlights. And I'd like to do a special shout out to the volunteers that did northern trips along some of the northern rivers to get coverage in the roadless north. As you can see from the photos, some of them submitted, they had a very good time and they found a lot of neat birds. So huge thanks to those folks who helped get some of the coverage in the hardest to reach places in the province. Okay, I wanted to show a few species maps, updated species maps, and some of the species that are showing changes between atlases. So just as a quick reminder for everybody, we've had 3, we're on to Atlas-3. And so our first atlas was in the early 80s, and then in the early 2000s was Atlas-2. And then of course we started Atlas-3 in 2021. So that's 40 years between Atlas-1 and Atlas-3. And we've seen some pretty big changes in a number of species. So I'm going to just highlight a few. We'll talk about a few later on as well. But this is blue-winged teal. And this species looks like it's really dropping off the map, literally, between Atlas 1, 2, and then 3. It's continued kind of that same trend, unfortunately. Another species that seems to be losing ground on our coverage maps, at least, are is the rough grouse. So this is especially true in southwestern Ontario, where if you focus in on that, on these rotating maps, it's really starting to retract its range in parts of southwestern Ontario, especially. But not all the changes are negative. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed a big difference in common raven. This is a species that in Atlas 1 was basically unheard of south of the Canadian Shield, with the exception of maybe Bruce Peninsula. In Atlas 2, we started seeing a bunch come south of the Canadian Shield. I'm from the Waterloo area, and I remember the squares that I was helping with around north of Waterloo. We got common raven like just after the Atlas 2 ended. So they just showed up there at kind of mid-2000s. And then they've just continued spreading south. In Atlas 3, we've got records down to as far as Chatham, Kent, into the Niagara Peninsula, into the Long Point area, Sarnia. It's just incredible. They're almost into Essex County, which is pretty mind-boggling. So pretty neat expansion of the species southward. Red-bellied woodpeckers moving the other direction, moving north or spreading north. So in Atlas 1, this was a real like Carolinian species. You basically had to go to the Niagara Peninsula, London area, Sarnia, or Essex County, Chatham, Kent kind of thing, extreme southwestern Ontario to see one. In Atlas 2, they were spreading north into the GTA and along North Shore Lake Ontario. And then Atlas 3, they've just gone even crazier, basically filling in the map up to the edge of the Canadian Shield. In Peterborough, where I am, there was a single square in the entire region that had a possible breeding evidence of red-bellied woodpecker in Atlas 2 20 years ago. And now it's found in almost every single square south of the Canadian Shield and some on the Shield. So it's pretty amazing to see that change. Okay, I'm going to turn things back over to Caitlin for a few slides.
Yeah, all right. So given all that we've told you, what are we focusing on for 2024? We've only got 2 seasons left, this upcoming season, and then the 2025 season, of course. So this year we want to focus on the gaps. We've already kind of looked at what regions are doing and how they're doing in terms of the peak hours and their point counts. So we want to focus on the squares that are missing those hours and point counts. We want to focus in on habitats that may have been missed. So if a square is at the 20 hours and 25 point counts, but they're missing all of the marsh bird species, just taking another look at the square to say, have I gone to those habitats, or is that potentially a habitat that's not here anymore? And then focusing in on point counts where they're missing as well. Again, focusing in on precise locations for significant records, so species at risk, colonial species, or other species of interest. You can pin their exact location. We have a few tutorials on our YouTube for how to do that, both on the Nature Counts web portal and on the Nature Counts app. We want to focus on special surveys. They are optional, but they are extremely valuable. Using the new and improved app, I've already plugged this, but if you haven't given it a try, please do so. We're starting our publication plans, and we're continuing our plans for data analysis. We have 1.5 million records, so really working out how we're going to analyze those data. Next slide. I just tried to advance the slide myself. Okay, here's some gaps. This is just showing squares that have less than 5 peak hours, point counts, or less than 5 peak hours and point counts. A lot of the ones that are that orangey color are actually over water, so don't be deceived by those ones. But there are some that are on land. You can see regions 34. Sorry, the Blind River region, sometimes I just say the numbers, the Blind River region, and all of those ones that are more in central Ontario are, are lacking the peak hours and point counts. As you get into Algonquin Park, there are a few squares like that as well. So if anyone wants to do a trip to Algonquin Park, that would obviously be quite helpful in that situation. And then the rest of them are kind of missing either point counts or the peak hours, but not both. Next slide. This is showing blocks that have squares, the number of squares with more than 12 hours and more than 15 point counts. You can see that there are some blocks that don't have any squares with greater than 12 peak hours and 15 point counts. So those are some of the squares that we're going to be targeting with our staff. But if there's anyone that wants to do any trips up there, of course, that would always be welcome as well. Make sure that you're reaching out to the regional coordinators that are local to those regions if you're planning on doing a significant amount of atlasing, and they can direct your efforts. Next slide. And these are the trips that we're planning for this upcoming season. These are the kind of, I think it's 8 that we highlighted for the 2024 season. So we've got plans underway to try to get volunteers on those trips. Yeah, I guess we'll have more info on that soon. Next slide. All right, getting involved. So there might be a variety of folks here, from very experienced atlasers or RCs to people who are just looking to get involved for the first time. And there are different intensities or involvement levels, I guess you could say. The first thing you could do is just register and make atlasing part of your everyday birding activities. If you're already a birder, the next step is to start atlasing. You can atlas anywhere, but of course, if you're going to do point counts or get more involved, you want to talk to the RCs. The next step would be to go atlasing in undersurveyed areas. And then you could talk to your regional coordinator about doing special surveys. So owl surveys, nightjar surveys, marsh bird surveys. You could join me and Mike at a Square Bash event. We'll talk a little bit about Square Bash events maybe in the reminders later. And so Square Bashes are where we go camping and atlasing together with volunteers at provincial parks. They're a lot of fun. They're my favorite part of the season, so we'd love to have you at one of those. One of the higher steps, I guess, would be to talk to your regional coordinator about doing point counts. So point counts, of course, involve a higher level of birding skill, unless, of course, you're using the Zoom unit, in which case you can do digital point counts. And then you can also apply to take part in one of our remote northern trips. And that is one of the tougher aspects of atlasing, of course, because it is quite remote. Next slide. All right, so yeah, if you register with Nature Counts, this is just a quick start of, how you can make birding, atlasing part of your regular birding activities. And so, register with Nature Counts, go birding, record what it's doing and how many you're seeing, and submit your checklist. Next slide. And again, this is just a reminder, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but there are different ways to enter your data. Of course, there's the Nature Counts app, which has been undergoing many, many developments and is, in a really great spot. I love using the Nature Counts app personally. If you're not an app person, you can use the Nature Counts online web portal. And so that's just on your computer. Or you can import data from eBird into Nature Counts. The only thing with using eBird is that it doesn't have the square boundaries. You don't know if you're crossing over square boundaries. It doesn't have some of the other warnings like safe dates. It doesn't have point count option or point count timer, but it is possible to import that checklist. You just have to make sure that all of the breeding and evidence codes are what you're expecting them to be. So there is some quality control that you have to do on your end at that point. All right, trivia, I'll hand it back to Mike.
All right, thanks, Kaylin. So, yeah, as is tradition with these celebrating and summarizing the end of the year and the start of the year Sappy hours, we've got a short trivia. So we've got 5 questions, and we're going to show them. For those of you on Facebook Live, you can type in your answer in the chat. For everybody else, if you're on Zoom, if you're joining us via Zoom, you'll have the option to answer the questions through a poll that will pop up. So be ready for that. And of course, we do have prizes. So we've got 2 copies of the Peterson Field Guide to North American Bird Nests. 2 copies. So 1 copy, it will be to somebody who gets the most right answers. If there's a tie, we'll just randomly pick somebody. And then the other copy will go to somebody that we randomly select that participates with the answers. So I'm gonna just move on to our first question, and Kaylin's gonna run the poll. So be patient here with us getting this working. Okay, so question 1, there's the poll, perfect. So question 1 is, which species do these maps belong to? And you've seen something similar to these maps already. These are the rotating maps, Atlas 1, 2, 3, up to now. So which species do these maps belong to? I will give you 30 seconds. All right, 20 more seconds. Seeing a bunch of answers coming in. Oh, it's a tight race here. 10 seconds. Get those answers in. Keep coming in. Okay, Kaylin, do you end it or do I? Okay. Let's see. What was the answer? Trumpeter swan. So, just over a third of you, or about a third of you, guessed the right answer, trumpeter swan. So in Atlas 1, we did not have trumpeter swans breeding in Ontario. There was a big reintroduction program in the 80s, starting in the 80s, and it focused in around that sort of Y-Marsh area was sort of the epicenter of that. And you can see in Atlas 2, they sort of were starting to spread, and they've continued to spread into Atlas 3. So pretty amazing success story. All right. Question 2. Same idea. Which species do these maps belong to? There we go. It pulls up. Okay, 30 seconds again. All right, 10 more seconds. Get those answers in. Couple more seconds. Get them in. All right. Correct answer is, come on here. There we go, bald eagle. So I fooled you because I showed you the raven map earlier, which looked similar, but this is bald eagle, which in Atlas 1 was mostly in northern Ontario. There was a few in along Lake Erie in southern Ontario, but it's just been amazing to see bald eagle coming back into southern Ontario and just filling in that map. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, question number 3. Last map question. Okay, so 30 more seconds here. Which species do these maps belong to? So I'll give you a hint for this one. You want to focus in on around Algonquin Park. All right, 10 more seconds. Answers are starting to fly in. 5 seconds. Okay. What is the answer? A lot of guesses for Canada Jay, a lot of guesses for Royal Chickadee. Those are both great guesses. The answer is Canada Jay, but the Royal Chickadee map looks very similar. So both of those species look like they're retracting their ranges north. In Atlas 3, they are becoming less common in around the Algonquin Park area and moving their sort of southern edge of their range further north. Okay, question 4, we're going to change it up a little. So after year 3, which species is no longer in the top 10 for squares with breeding evidence? Which of those species is no longer in the top 10? It was last year at this time. See how well you can remember earlier slides. Okay, yeah, in 30 seconds. So you got about 20 seconds left. Good. Good. Answers are coming in. We got 5 more seconds here. And time. Okay, let's see. A lot of guesses for chickadee, northern flicker. Good guesses. So here we go. Here's the top 13. And black-cap chickadee was, where are my notes? Black-cap chickadee was number 6 after last year, but has dropped out of the top 10, sitting now at number 12. So a bit of a change after year 3. Okay, and the final question. Which species is not in the top 20 for most pinned locations? Those are where we're talking about pinning the specific site where you observed a species. Which of these species is not in the top 20? All right, in 30 seconds. Answers are coming in. All right, 10 more seconds. Lots of guesses. It's a pretty even split. This is a pretty tough one. Okay, 5 seconds. And okay, we'll call it. All right, so the answer is Ovenbird. These are your top 20 for number of pinned records. And I was very surprised, as clearly you also are, that Eastern Whippoorwill and Golden Winged Warbler are both in the top 20, but Ovenbird, which is one of our most common species as a breeder, is not. So congratulations to the 10 of you who guessed, or maybe you knew the answer was Ovenbird. Okay, I'm going to stop that. All right, so just a reminder, please follow us on our social media channels. If you want to learn more, head to birdsontario.org, our website. I'm going to stop sharing and pass it back to Claire to wrap up the rest of the evening. Stop share. Go.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Mike and Kaylin. That was a great presentation, and so nice to have some some overview of the past year. It's we've made a lot of progress this Atlas, and I'm excited to see where it's going to go next. So we have some questions that are starting to come in. Just a reminder to participants, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Mike or Kaylin, feel free to put it in the question and answer function. Again, that's at the bottom of your screen here. There should be a Q&A icon there, and it has two little chat bubbles. You can type your question there. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can type your question in the comments, and we'll address that as well. So we do have a question. I'll start us off. So this is from an anonymous asker. Are there any particular species that you would like photos of for the Atlas? And what kinds of photos are you most interested in? So it will be easier to narrow down the choices. So I don't know, Mike or Kaylin, if either one of you want to answer that one.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, Mike looked like he was pointing at me. Yeah, there's around, I think there's just over 50 species that we don't have photos for just yet. So it's probably a bit of a list to say right now. But if you are a photographer, you have photos of birds, you don't necessarily have to be a photographer for that, but you can always reach out to us via email. Atlas@birdsontario.org, and maybe we can find a way to get some of those photos into the Atlas. And I think we will be posting an announcement soon with the species that we still need. We're working with we have kind of a group of photographers that are giving us some advice on the best way to get those photos. Thanks, Mike, for putting that in the chat there. So the email for reaching out to us is in the chat. That's atlas@birdsontario.org. I will also put it on Facebook.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kaylin.
Mm-hmm.
We did have a question in the chat as well that I see that you answered, Kaylin, but I'll just say it for everyone in case other people have the same question. As Michael asked, if you cannot attend one of the webinars, how can I view it through YouTube or some other way? And Kaylin, you had answered that, yeah, you can view that question on our Sappy Hour YouTube channel. We'll have this recording posted. So that's where you can find this if you are unable to join this or another of our Sappy Hours. We have another question here. All right, from another anonymous attendee. Because the coverage away from rivers in the roadless north will be improved compared to the first two atlases, how will you compare occurrence of those species across the 3 time periods? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say the way we are going to end up analyzing the data is still the exact methodology is still being refined, it's kind of cool. We've got the Saskatchewan Breeding Bird Atlas that just wrapped up a couple years ago. So we're able to test out a lot of these new analytical techniques and modeling techniques on those on the Saskatchewan Atlas, and that's what's happening right now. And then we're going to take basically what we learned from the Saskatchewan Atlas and apply it to the Ontario data set, which is going to be huge. So we've got a bit of a head start, which is great. In terms of comparing back, that is a great question. So a lot of the products that are going to come out of the analysis are going to be doing things like modeling based on habitat and all sorts of other variables that we can input into these things. So it's a very complex system. You won't obviously be able to go and compare like raw information, like whether or not a species was in this particular square to that particular square. There's lots of other things that have changed, obviously, between Atlas 1, Atlas 2, and 3, whether it's the habitats changed or other survey changes. So there's always going to be challenges to compare back to the other atlases, but I have a lot of faith in people that know a lot more about analysis than I do, that we're gonna be able to get it right, and it's going to be pretty exciting to see.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. All right, we have another question here from Eric. Is there any need or opportunity for volunteers to help with processing ARU recordings?
Yeah, another good question. So far we've been extremely lucky that we've been able to cover the cost of having that done by professionals. So we haven't had that need yet, but we've always had that kind of in the back of our mind that if that need arose, we would have hopefully some volunteers interested in doing it, but we haven't needed that, and we're really excited that we've been able to hire real experts to be able to do that. So we've got real high confidence that the identifications are high quality.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question from an anonymous poster. Hello, I'm new to this and I'm just wondering if you share info with or collaborate with Project Feeder Watch. Thank you.
We haven't had any data come in from Feeder Watch. We have had data come in from other Birds Canada projects. So the owl surveys, like the nocturnal owl surveys and the Canadian nightjar surveys and those Birds Canada projects, but we haven't yet had any Feeder Watch data. I'm not sure if Mike wants to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so the nice thing is, because we use Nature Counts as our database for the Atlas, it gives us access to all the other Birds Canada project data, as Kaylin said. So Project Feeder Watch is one of those. There's probably not a lot of opportunity there because Project Feeder Watch focuses on winter birds, and so there's not a lot of overlap between the birds that are coming to your bird feeder in the winter and the birds that are nesting in a given area. So that's not one we've explored, but certainly those other projects that are much more in line with the Atlas data that we're looking for, like the owl surveys and the nightjar surveys. Those data are flowing freely into the Atlas, which is super exciting to give us a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question from another anonymous poster asking about how to enter observations from a trail camera or incidentals. Yeah,
so incidental observations are great. They're sort of like not as valuable as a complete checklist. So if you go out and you collect a list of all the birds you can see or hear in a given area during the breeding season, that's like the absolute highest quality data. Point counts being one way to do that. So that's what we really are looking for, because that tells us information about abundance. It tells us about all the species you didn't see. So the absence side of things. But incidentals are a great source of information as well, especially to raise the highest level of breeding evidence observed in a square. So certainly you can enter either with the Nature Counts app or through the website. You can start a checklist that's just got the date and time if you have that. and you don't put any effort, like you don't have an amount of time that you spent looking, that can go in as an incidental observation, certainly. Anything that's collected with like remote sensed, so whether it's like a song meter or a trail cam, we'd prefer you to reach out to the Atlas office first, so that we can make sure we're tagging it properly, to capture any differences in sort of methodology, if it's not a human that's collecting the data. So if you've got some data like that, just reach out to the office, at atlas@birdsontario.org, and we can chat about your specific data. But certainly incidentals are welcome into the Atlas database.
Good, thank you. And we have another question, this one from Lisa. Will you cherry pick media from eBird for the Atlas?
Yeah, we don't have a plan to do that right now. I could certainly see that being a possibility, if, like, you know, we're like, man, we really need a photo of a Connecticut warbler, and it would be nice if we could find a Connecticut warbler on a nest. And nobody submitted that to us, and we've asked people for that, and nobody's giving it to us. And if we see there's a really great photo like that on eBird, then we would certainly consider reaching out to that person and seeing if we get permission. But that's sort of like, that's our last resort kind of thing, looking for those last few photos that we might need. But we're hoping, we've got a photo team, as Kaylin said, as part of our publication plans, that we're hoping that photo team is going to get most of the photos we need, and we'll get lots through volunteers through specific asks over the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you. Another question just posted in here, from another anonymous poster. I plan to travel to a few areas in the province in June and would like to help out. How do I find the regional coordinators of each area to know where the gaps are?
I can answer that. I was just looking up the URL, but oh, and Mike just posted the URL. So thanks, Mike. Yeah, so on the Atlas website, birdsontario.org, under Get Involved, there's a Contact Us button, I guess, and that will give you a map. It shows a map of all of the regions and has the regional coordinator email address for each one of those regions as well. So if you zoom in on the map, you can even click on the region and it will come up and say what the region name is and what the regional coordinator's email address is.
All right, thank you very much. We don't have any more questions as of now. If anybody has any more questions, we do have a few minutes. If you would like to ask a question, please type it in the question and answer function, and yeah, we can answer that for you. Just give it a few minutes, a few seconds if anyone has any other questions. But it's been great to learn more about what we've accomplished in this past year. Like I said, it was yeah, a great presentation from Mike and Kaylin. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I mean, we definitely couldn't do it without our regional coordinators and without our without, you know, the 1,500 or so people that have submitted data to the Atlas. Like I said, Mike and I and Claire and our staff, even with 10 staff, couldn't be all over the province all at once. So, you know, we really appreciate everything you do. 1.5 million records to me is insane. It's just mind blowing to think about. So thank you all for all that you do.
Yeah. All right. So since we have no more questions, we'll leave it there for now. So if you do have any more questions, you can always reach out to the Atlas team at our email address, which is atlas@birdsontario.org, which we've posted in the chat as well. Also, take a look around our website. We have a lot of information on there, and you should be able to find most of the answers to your questions on the website. And then, as always, we do have a Discord server, and that's a really great place to chat with other Atlasers, There's different channels for each region, and just ask all sorts of questions with other Atlasers and with the Atlas team as well about all things relating to the Atlas. I'll also remind you guys that this will be posted, this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So if you ever wanted to go back to something that we talked about or a question that we answered, you could always do that. I'll turn over to Mike and Kaylin if you have any last minute remarks.
Yeah, just a reminder, these Sappy Hours, the Sappy Hour series is going to go on for another 3 sessions next week and then the 2 weeks after that. So if you've signed up for those sessions, then you'll get reminders, no problem. We will be promoting our square bashes for this upcoming season soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Mike, any reminders that I'm forgetting? No? All right, well, that sounds good.
All right.
Just a
Great,
final
well,
thank you to everyone. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for attending our first Sappy Hour of the year. And yeah, we look forward to having you guys join us for our next Sappy Hours next weekend for the rest of the month.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Hey, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.